You had some more.
Is there a similarity, difference, or fine line between detachment and non-caring? Letting go versus non-caring. And how do you know?
No Buddhist, if he's a real Buddhist worth his salt, is non-caring. Absolutely no Buddhist is that. But there are times when if you show too much care, somebody doesn't really try to help himself. It's a very fine line, but I can guarantee you that no Buddhist worth his salt is non-caring. Now, I don't doubt there are some who call themselves Buddhists who could come under that category. I pray there are not, but, you know, saints have been rare in all religions in all centuries. Buddhism is no exception to that. Unfortunately, and I don't doubt there are some that I would rather not think of, but who must be there. Next question.
I went to a session where after the meditation, the monks went in front of each of the people and they bowed, and then he hit them on the back with a stick.
Yes.
And maybe covered it with money and got his raise. But can you explain that to me? I don't know what they're doing.
There are a number of theories behind this. Unfortunately, to a large extent, the use of it in Japan at the moment is because it is a hereditary priesthood. Some young monks are not as eager as they could be and need encouragement, shall we say. There are a number of uses for it. The best is if you do certain types of meditation, if you do Shin meditation, for example, you hold your thumbs up like this and press them hard, which creates incredible tension in the shoulders. And you come by with a flattish stick and hit the shoulders, and it helps the tension. I have never really seen the purpose of that. It reminds me of a phrenologist who went around with a hammer and hit somebody over the head in order to raise a bump so that he'd have something to read. That's just me though, I've never seen any other purpose for it with regard to it than that. Although it can be, if you've been sitting for a tremendously long time and the person knows what he's doing, it can relieve tension. Unfortunately, the number of people who really know what they're up to with that is extraordinarily small, as I know very well in Japan. In the first sesshin, or full-length, retreat, rain retreat, that I had there were 4 very eager but not very competent young men who went around using this thing, and it ended up with 4 busted collarbones and 1 busted upper arm bone, which I personally do not see as making terribly much sense. I can remember discussing this with my what's called Kyojushi. That's the person who teaches you the precepts, your precept master. And his opinion was that people should not, under any circumstances, be disturbed when they were meditating, but that a lot of traditions had grown up in various temples and were perpetuated simply because they were traditions. Dogen himself wrote a long treatise on it, and I did a couple of lectures on it, which we can dig up if somebody's interested. I think we've got them on tape, haven't we? Yeah. Another use of it and this is an interesting one, in China, when it first started, there was a sort of flat board, a bit like a long, what am I thinking of, a long flat pizza panel? Or a cricket bat. It's about this long, and it's about this wide, and it's flat, and it had a handle. And they used to mash the incense on it and set light to it. And they would walk around, hold it around the zendo, and anybody who had fallen asleep in meditation, they'd hold it under his nose. And the pungent smell of the incense will bring the person back to awareness. And therefore it was called the awakening board. At a later date, they moved from defense to offense, and it became the awakening stick. Presumably, some didn't awaken as fast as they could from the smell of the incense. That's the best answer I can give you, unless you get this whole lecture on Dogen's teaching on it. We don't use it at all in Shasta. They're all volunteers. I don't need to go around beating them up. I don't want to lose them. I like them.
In the Middle Ages, the Benedictines, they would follow this prescribed order of prayer where you come in at 9 and then you go to bed and get up at 12 and then at 3 and then at 6. And there'd be a monk walking through the choir, and it's usual in monasteries when people are really tired and they do a lot of work. You'll have somebody starting to nod, and he'd be walking through with a lantern and just sort of very gently shaking them, saying, "Wake up, wake up." And we prefer that method rather than whack. It works better in the long run.
I think, well, you've got to remember that Sorjiji, which is where I went, was very much a boarding school for 17-and-a-half-year-olds who just left high school, or 20-year-olds who just left university, who've got to take over the family temple. They weren't always as cooperative as they could have been. But to use the awakening board for disciplinary purposes is not good. It is not conducive to meditation, and we have proved it to be totally unnecessary. Now, there does come a time in what's sometimes called fourth stage meditation, where in meditation a person is, as is said in one of the scriptures, in the beginning the mallet will strike the Buddha on the foot, later it will strike him on the head, where certain things happen in meditation that are not caused by human agency. But it is not good for humans to go around trying to emulate the doings of the eternal. If we ever publish this thing, The Way to the Light of Heaven, there's some more information on that will come out. A lot of people base the use of the cure sack on that, but unfortunately most of the monitors in large Zen temples are not saints. As I said, they're rare in any century. Okay? Yes? I can't hear, sorry. Yes?
I found this happening to me, and I'm concerned about that.
If it happens, you do one of two things. Either take off some clothing because you're possibly too hot, or put some on because, oddly enough, if you're too cold, it'll happen too. So do one or other of those. If that is not the answer, move your head from side to side very carefully. and roll the body around a little because it may not be settled levelly. If that doesn't help, stand up and do a little walking meditation, and we'll show you how to do that tomorrow.
I was under the impression that this is very new to me, that you went to the moon and your state staring, and I went through all the uncomfortable body, and I guess that's why I started to fall asleep.
Yeah. The body has some natural defenses, which is why I said that you have to give it its rights. You can push it, but you can never totally subdue it. Somebody asked me what I meant by that on one occasion, and I said, well, you can control the bowel, but you can't subdue it. And he got the point loud and clear. Nope. This was just the material it was made of. This is the plum blossom crest of the royal family, the Empress's crest of Japan, because Sojiji was an imperial temple. And this is a plum blossom, which has the 5 petals of the Buddha's halo, the 5 colors of the Buddha's halo. Red, yellow, green, white, purple all shoot through the red plum blossom. The plum blossom does not know that it is red, but it leads Ray unto the truth, says the old poem. It comes out in early February with nothing on the stalk except this red blossom. I have one in my temple in Japan. I tried to buy one for over here, but couldn't. You cannot get them over here. Yes, you had a...
Is there some difference in opinion in Zen groups about whether there should be occupation paid for Kensho? I've mentioned it or asked about it in certain other groups, and they said you don't.
The danger of concerning oneself with Kensho is that people can presume it to be much bigger than it actually was. The thing is this, Kensho is Kensho. Even a tiny glimpse of the eternal is still a glimpse of the eternal. But if you pay too much attention to it, the person can blow it out of all proportion. It should be normal to be getting glimpses of the eternal. It shouldn't be remarkable. The person should not be thinking of himself as especially remarkable because he's getting it. Therefore, although one is hoping to get Kensho as a result of meditation, the fact that it has happened in a big or small way is neither here nor there, because what really is important is the maintaining of that state of body and spirit. And that can only be done by eternal training, as it were, in this world. Does that answer your question?
Well, so why is there sometimes going to be a refusal to want to talk that way?
Because of people getting caught up, as I understand it, in words the master might say and suffering from the idea he'd had one when perhaps he hadn't. You don't want to confuse people. There's nothing wrong in talking about it if you know your people well enough and know they're not going to go off imagining things. But amongst lay groups there is a lot of reticence of talking about it precisely because of misunderstanding. I am not terribly reticent about talking about it, but that has come back and slugged me once or twice. Yes. Yes.
I work in a very competitive environment, business environment, and people are continually breaking the precepts around me, not that they made them in the first place, but in competing, they're always talking against one another and gossiping and tearing the other people down. I find sometimes difficult to maintain myself amongst that, and how can I work through that besides through example of being successful while maintaining myself?
Can you be successful and competitive without talking against others? Can you be a success in your job, in other words, without breaking the precepts yourself?
Well, I know that I can, but it's a matter of how can I share that with the other people? And how
that's very simple. Just never break the precepts in the sense of competing, in the sense of talking against them and the like. And eventually, at least one of them will come up to you and say, you don't sort of fight us. Why? Just do it. There's an old story I've told many times which really speaks to this, and it's about myself as a youngster during World War II in England. Everything was rationed. Food was extremely scarce. I bent down on one occasion to tie my shoelace outside a baker's shop, and 50 formed a queue behind me. They were all convinced I was going to get bread. Does that give you an idea of what to do? Just do it. I went down to my little temple after I left the big royal temple of Sojiji in the country in Japan. And I went and did my meditation looking at a wall, and the mayor turned up, and what's that monk doing looking at a wall? And he went off and he rang up Sojiji, wanting to know what I was doing looking at a wall. And the bosses of Sojiji said, what the so-and-so heck has the previous priest been doing that none of the congregation know why the priest is looking at a wall? Which is a very good point. And they explained to him. And people came and started looking at a wall. And they said to me, what do you get when you look at a wall? I said, well, come and look at a wall and we'll see together. And I got quite a congregation in the end. In other words, you have to do it before it'll happen. And don't get miserable if they grin at you. Think of them as the 2-year-old child that tries to pull its mother away from looking at the wall. Just go on, don't worry about it. I can remember a secretary at the American Embassy in Tokyo saying to me on one occasion when I was out to dinner with an American colonel there, I don't know, you care so much about all of this and nobody cares. I said, well, you're telling me you care about me right now. I said, well, yes. That's all right. I'll accept that as a start. Don't expect too much. And just keep going. Of course, there are some occupations that it is said it is best a Buddhist doesn't do. One is that of being a butcher, because of the constant cutting up of formerly live bodies or live bodies. There are certain things it is recommended not to do. Killing fish is another one. Anything that is really going to coarsen. But you've got a lovely stomping ground by the sound of it. Yes, yes. Yeah.
And then his comment about when your coworkers are, not behaving correctly, but you just do your thing. Well, what if you're the boss and these aren't just your coworkers, and you can't always just let them do their job?
Then you're in the predicament that I'm in with my monks, aren't you? And you'd have to take the consequences of that. It is not easy. No. But whatever you do, don't do it ever unreasonably. And don't do it unless you absolutely have to. And you can sort of pick a standard and say, well, I'm not going to let anything drop below this one. And then when they've all reached that standard, this is what I did in Shasta. When they'd all reached that one, I upped the ante. And one or two went splat and left us, and the rest went on. And then when they'd all reached the next level, I upped the ante again, and one or two left us, and the rest went on. It's the only way I know to do it. And I mean what I'm saying. I've been at it a long time. It's the only way. It's the only way I know. It is extremely difficult for the head of an organization. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. And you have to say, well, this is the limit. I'm not going to go below. And then choose the next one and take it up from there. People say, how do I start? The answer is right where you are. There is no other place to start from. When we first opened the temple in England, it was best described as a catastrophe with 4 walls. And somebody said to me, well, what do we do? I mean, where do we start? I said, give me a broom. And I started sweeping away from my own toes. And when I got a clean spot, I transferred my feet to the clean spot and swept underneath the feet. I mean, where else do you start from but where you are? The best advice I can give you. Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm wondering what you might do with uncomfortable body sensations or chronic pain.
Uncomfortable body sensations are usually the result of wrong posture. So, or too much clothing or too little clothing. One of the things I should have told you all here was take your shoes off. But I've never been too sure where this carpet's been, so I don't recommend it. Not in here, at any rate. I have, one does have to be somewhat careful. But when you're at home meditating, check whether you need an open window. You need a quiet room. You need a clean room. You don't want it to be too full of light. You don't want it to be too dark. It's nice to have a plant. You don't want cut flowers. There's something in the meditation that will make your ankles hurt. It's almost as though you cut the roots off and you get the karmic consequence from the flowers. It's very interesting. So you want an actual plant, a live plant. You don't really want electricity if you can avoid it. A candle is much wiser. We find that small candle votive glasses with that type of candle is the safest for doing it. It is nice to have incense, but you want to be careful that it is not too pungent. Make sure that when you sit down, your body really is as weightless as you can get it. If your first step is false, you will immediately stumble. This is why it is important to know that the purpose of meditation is to find the eternal and to get beyond the opposites. And the teaching of the precepts shows you how difficult actually it is to live beyond the opposites. And watching what the Buddha did and seeing how he lived beyond the opposite is a magnificent example. I only wish the temples over here had all these lovely pictures. to help people. Already you are in possession of the vital attributes of a human being. Do not waste time with this and that. You can possess the authority of Buddha immediately. Of what use is it to merely enjoy this fleeting world? This body is as transient as dew on the grass. Life passes as swiftly as a flash of lightning. Quickly the body passes away. In a moment life is gone. O sincere trainees, do not doubt the true dragon, the eternal. Do not spend so much time in rubbing only a part of the elephant. This is the story of the blind men who were trying to say what an elephant looked like, and one felt the tail and said it's a long rope, and another felt the leg and said, no, it isn't, it's a big pillar, and a third felt the ear and said, it's a flat sheep, what are you talking about? Don't just rub part of the elephant, get in there and do something, is what Dogen is saying. Look inward and advance directly along the road that leads to the eternal. Respect those who have reached the goal of goallessness. Oh, God, one of those again, but I couldn't think of any other way of putting it. You know, the much of a muchness and the such of a suchness? Those who have reached the goal of the eternal. And that's my words. Become one with the wisdom of the Buddhas. Transmit the wisdom of the ancestors. If you do these things for some time, you will become as herein described, and then the treasure house will open naturally, and you will enjoy it fully. And believe me, that treasure house exists. I know. So, if you want to take a short... Ooh, that was a long time. If you want to take a short stretch, we'll get ready and we'll do some meditating. Those who do not want to, would they please go and see our friend here? Yes. Whatever schedule you set up, keep it. Even if it's only for a couple of minutes or just sitting down. I recommend for people who've never done it before, do at least 5 minutes night and morning. The way you get yourself being able to sit longer is by pushing yourself about 2 minutes longer than you can sit comfortably. That way you don't dread meditation, and you keep learning to be able to sit longer, but never sit longer than 45. Now, if you're going to miss, supposing you get up late and you think, I haven't got time to do 45 minutes, I haven't even got time to do 5, that's all right. But at least sit down on a chair or the edge of the bed and recollect for a second, and then go on. In other words, show the willingness, although the time isn't there. One of the things I recommend to people in the city, for example, is you waste an incredible amount of time at stoplights if you're driving cars around. And if the thing's just gone red, you can put your mind in the stillness of meditation until the yellow one hits. And you can save yourself hours of extra meditation that way. It works beautifully. But whatever you set up, keep to it. If you set up, shall we say, 10 minutes morning, 10 minutes night, always try to sit down for at least a fraction of that. And never sit to the extent when you're in such pain you're dreading the next meditation. Because that is one of the big problems that happened with people in the 60s and early 70s who went to the Far East. They were very sincere. They wanted to be really good at it. And there are some things that take as long as they take to be good at. And the body does have rights. You have to train it carefully, just as you train a puppy. It doesn't happen overnight. if you push it always a couple of minutes longer than it can handle, up to 45 minutes, you'll be able to sit 45 minutes beautifully in quite a short time. Yes. Not quite 45 minutes. It was about 40, according to my watch. Yes. Well, if you do it right, it doesn't seem like a second. But you have to learn to do it right first. You have to get the body right. And as I just said, the body has rights. Don't pretend or don't think that it hasn't. This is the big danger of asceticism. It's interesting in all those slides on the ascetic, constantly trying to prove themselves so superior to the Buddha. That's a very telling set of slides, that one. Shows just what went on, and it's not all that different from now. Even to the drought. I liked that one. I'd forgotten that one was in. Yes. A group can help, especially if they're very positive and want to really try. One of the problems in some of the groups I was with in the Far East was that they were doing it because they had to, because it was they were belonging to hereditary temples. And an awful lot of those young men were not pleased to be monks. And it was frequently quite difficult to sit with them. Here we're all volunteers. There's a lot of difference to having in volunteers impressed men. And a lot of the use of the Kyosak was because they were pressed men, which on occasion made it rather unpleasant. You're quite right. With a volunteer group, it can be very enjoyable. I was sorry about the bells and the noises that kept coming from outside, because I had told you were going to get a bell, and I wasn't expecting one that sounded quite like the one I got. Yes. I beg your pardon? Ravens, I saw. Yes, we're definitely... Up in Shasta, we've got thousands of different birds. And they stop off now in flocks on the way down. We're a sort of one of the main stops on I-5 we've discovered. And the priory over in Berkeley is full of birds. Isn't it?
They're all real.
Oh, they're real. Yeah. There's a story of a Briton who went to live in the country from London and who went back to London because the birds tramping about in the trees woke him up in the morning. I've always liked that one. Yes?
In the back of one of your books, the one with the movement, the green book?
Yes?
It has a diagram of if you're following the breath, the flow of the breath, I think up the back and down the front.
Yes, yes, yes.
Is that important? That's the only place I've ever seen.
That comes from The Way to the Light of Heaven, that big treatise that I told you about, done by Dharma. Obviously, of course, the path of real breath, as we understand breath, doesn't work that way. But I shall be getting into an explanation of the wheel of the law tomorrow. And that is the following of the wheel of the law, which is done through the breath. You'll be hearing a lot about that tomorrow. Yes.
It seems to me that everything you said has led me to believe that you come to this belief through experience and through training and through
You come to the knowledge of the eternal through the certainty, through absolute certainty, which you get in meditation.
And these things come after years. How do you keep it to children?
It doesn't necessarily come after years.
Does it come from Christian parents? Does it come from internal? How do little children grow?
I can give you a case in point of how you would teach the truth of death to a child. I had a friend once who wrote a lot of children's stories, and he used Big Frog for the job, and he would take his Sunday school class out to the pond at the back of the temple. And there was a huge frog that lived in it, and a lot of fish and everything else. And I remember him telling the story, and it's in print now, of a big grub that everybody loved that lived at the bottom of the pond. And one day, the fish went to talk to Big Frog because the grub was all busted open. And it was terrible. The big grub wasn't there any longer. There was just this shell lying by it. And Big Frog explained how the shell had split, and there, as they looked up through the water, above the water was flying a magnificent dragonfly. And he told this story to a child who just lost her mother. That is the way you use nature a tremendous amount, as the Taoists do, to teach children the truth of Zen. Oh, yes. In fact, I think there's more. Because then they want to go far beyond the ordinary moral understanding of precepts to the deeper meaning. And they're an absolute joy to know in many ways. They start meditating at 2. I have sat with a bunch of 2-year-olds in Sorges who sat rather better than some of the adults in the same temple. I'm sorry to say. We tried it with our Sunday school up in Shasta, and one set of parents had a scrap on one occasion, and their 3-year-old daughter tugged at her mother's skirt and said, "Mummy, you need to get back to your secret place." And that ended the fight. They knew what they're doing. One of the beauties of the treatise I told you about is it talks of how easy it is to tear a child away from its natural understanding. I'm sure you all know, I think it's the Catholic Church that says that a child, if it dies before the age of 7, rests in peace, and if it's after the age of 7, it's may he or she rest in peace, because that is given as the age when somebody, roughly speaking, knows what is right and wrong. I personally think that knowledge comes a fair bit earlier, but that just could be our generations of it. Maybe it didn't come earlier in olden days, I don't know. But the fact remains that according to this very fine treatise on Zazen that I'm talking about, they point out how easy it is through education of what we think is necessary for survival in the, in quotes, human tribe, how we pull the average child out of that place of safety where it knows the eternal. Because that's how it can survive once it's left that place in the human tribe. And I've often thought that a lot of what we do for education, or at any rate when I was in England, you had to learn how to communicate, English, reading and writing. You had to learn the history of our tribe, which was the history of England. You had to learn what other tribes were like, which was geography. And really all we were doing was very much what we've been doing with my young bloodhound, which is teaching him who's boss. But if we'd left the children alone, because we knew, because we got our tribe in such good order that we didn't have to pull them away from their natural state, who knows where we would end up? You see, we only have to use this form of education because that's the tribe we belong to. But we can always change the tribe in the sense of change how the tribe thinks. If you see what I'm getting at on that. It rather worried me when I discovered that education was really how to survive in our tribe. Worrying thought, that. But what else is it? Some other people have... Yes.
About the precept.
Yes.
If you see evil going on, then do I, from what you said, you do not enter in?
If you see evil going on...
Somebody injuring another or in the process of injuring another.
Physically, I would call the police. Physically, I would call the police. Morally, I would have to do it on an individual basis of what would cause the least harm to both sides. And just maybe I would have to take the responsibility of giving myself some karma in order to prevent a worse evil taking place. You can't run away from responsibility. Yes. If I were to go along the street and I saw in a window somebody strangling his wife, I get to the nearest phone and call the cops. And other situations you have to take on an individual basis, but know that there will always be karmic consequence. You can't escape the responsibility of what you do. And one of the main things you have to teach to the young is to be responsible. If you make a mistake, admit it, stand up and deal with it. If you break a precept, be willing to take the consequences. The life after the next one. It means down the various generations. It may not come out in the next generation, it can come out in the generation after that. Yes. Or it could come out a couple of 100 years from now. Nobody quite knows when something is going to come out. Okay? Yes? Well, I am not a psychologist. I am not going to try and answer it from that point of view. But I can tell you this. Most of the people I have met have had such a well-developed self, in fact all of them have, that I've really not seen that to be necessary. Now that's not meant to be facetious or comic. It's just a statement of fact. I personally have never seen it necessary. But maybe it is in some cases. I don't know. Fair enough?
What do you mean by self?
Well, I think it's ego is what they're referring to. I'm the answer for that kind of, that's what I get that. I think it's ego they're referring to, and again, it's over 4,000 of ego, and it's how one has to build them up and then.
I'm thinking in case of someone, I suppose, who has been beaten down so much by circumstances and environment and situation. I presume that's what you must mean. I would say in that case, see a doctor. Because there is a time. The one thing Zen will not do is tell you to, it won't do faith healing, shall we put it that way, in the sense of you don't need a doctor, you don't need to take your medicine, Zen will do it all for you. If the doctor tells you to take antibiotics, you take antibiotics, and you meditate at the same time, which helps. But you're not out there to try and do something that could possibly harm you. And if I would say someone in a situation like that could quite easily need a doctor, I'd still recommend him to meditate as well. Now, one of the beauties of Buddhism is that it does not fight with other professions. And it can see their use and their value. Yeah. Don't say we've exhausted all the questions. Sorry, Frank, go ahead. Yeah. Not quite. Could you give me some more details?
To look for the positive honoring
Yes.
God rather than looking at the damage.
Well, you can certainly tell him he's already got the Buddha nature and go look for it. Yes, you most certainly could do that, and I most certainly would. But I'm not going to say he may not need other people to help boost his ego because it's already been damaged so much. I'm not going to say that's not necessary.
You can help the person to look at their suffering in such a way where it can actually help them rather than, bind them, hold them down. So they have to, they can, and they do.
Into the business of karma, because you see, the Four Noble Truths, there is suffering, there is the cause of suffering, there's the end of suffering, and there's the Eightfold Path. The cause of suffering is what you are frequently seeing in the past life stuff that comes up. And that can also show you traits in your own life that cause suffering. So in that sense, yes, it could be extremely valuable. Yes.